I'd wager a guess that when it comes to games, just about everyone has a game, if not at least a single moment, that really excited their formative imaginations, like a gaming first love now drenched in wonder and nostalgia. Perhaps for you, it's the opening tram ride in Half-Life, or maybe looking on the back of the box to find Meryl's codec frequency in Metal Gear Solid, and maybe it's a more recent memory like Alduin's attack on Helgen at the beginning of Skyrim. Well, for me, this moment is Bungie's Halo Combat Evolved. Originally released in 2001, Combat Evolved was a mystifying, creepy sci-fi mystery deceitfully wrapped in a high-octane 1980s action flick. The Master Chief was a really cool, chill main character who offered few words, while Cortana, his AI sidekick, gave the duo an infectious spunk. Combat Evolved's multiplayer was just as good as the single player, following the fast-paced formula of popular shooters like Unreal Tournament and Quake, but at a slower, more deliberate pace. It's no exaggeration that with Combat Evolved, Bungie built a mechanical and narrative marvel, a masterpiece of gaming whose influence on game design has, in some ways, continued to this day. What's more important than my childlike puppy love for an old video game is the franchise's transformative lineage. For nearly a decade, Halo didn't just improve with every new entry to the series, but was at the forefront of gaming. Combat Evolved spearheaded Microsoft's entry into the console wars, releasing alongside the original Xbox and giving the console a killer must-have app right out of the gate. In 2004, Halo 2 surpassed $125 million in day one sales and popularized this novel idea of playing over the internet with other Xbox owners. Halo 2 was the king of Xbox Live for years, remaining the most played game on the service even into the Xbox 360's life. Halo 3's release in 2007 beat Halo 2's day one sales by $45 million and introduced modes like Forge that allowed players to build their own custom maps and a theater mode to capture gameplay and save clips, years before that would become a standard feature in game consoles. Soon after Halo 3's release, news broke that Bungie would be splitting from Microsoft keeping the rights to Halo, with the newly formed 343 Industries eventually taking the reins. Bungie's final two Halo games were a phenomenal swan song. Both excellent spin-offs, Halo ODST and Halo Reach took characters and settings that had previously only been a part of the extended Halo universe and introduced them to the series. Halo ODST is somewhat of a cult classic nowadays, but under 343 Industries, with Halo 4 in 2012 and Halo 5 Guardians in 2015, the franchise began to lose its way a little. The first three games in the franchise told a full story, meaning Halo 4 and 5 had to tell something new, and thus far, the results have been a mixed bag. The Reclaimer Saga, as it's been named, opened the universe up a bit more and made the Master Chief more talkative and emotional, but it also introduced unnecessary characters and tossed in an odd, unneeded plot twist. Mechanically, the series began to alter itself to fit the trends of games that, by that time, were more popular. Halo 4 made sprinting a permanent ability, and multiplayer games were based on loadouts similar to Call of Duty. Halo 5 followed in the footsteps of games like Titanfall and Call of Duty 2, leaning away from the franchise's relatively slower pace for faster, more fluid movement that included abilities like dashing, hovering, and climbing. I think it's fair to say that Halo 4 and 5, while not a total loss, represent the franchise's low point. This leads us to the present day. Halo Infinite was announced at E3 2018, and as we near the end of a console generation, Halo will once again be an important piece of Microsoft's strategy transitioning into whatever their next console is. Little is known about Infinite itself. It's been confirmed that Infinite will sport an art style closer to that of the older series entries, as well as Halo Reach style customization. Among the biggest announcements is that Infinite will include split-screen play, a series staple whose absence from Halo 5 was strongly felt. How Infinite shapes up, time will tell, but for now, I'd rather talk about the things I want, so I put together a wish list. And starting off, we should talk about that story. Halo 4 set the stage for what seemed like an interesting new direction. The Chief talked a little more and was more expressive, and the new villain, the Didact, was ruthless and self-assured. There was a rivalry developing between the two, highlighted by the finale, when the Chief knocks the Didact off a bridge into an uncertain future and Cortana sacrifices herself to keep the Chief alive. Halo 4 closed with the Didact monologuing about the threat humanity posed, seemingly foreshadowing his return. While we'd have to wait to see how the Chief coped coped with the loss of his closest and maybe only confidant. Halo 5 disrupted this interesting premise. The didact was nowhere to be found, the chief apparently reconnected with some old friends from his past, there was a whole new squad of Spartans you got to play as, and Cortana was a villain? Halo 5's biggest issue was that it took supplemental elements from the extended universe and made them main portions of the story. I had grown up with the chief and Cortana, I had an emotional connection with them as characters, and seeing Cortana sacrifice herself was extremely sad and a really good fitting story. But the chief's old squad, I had no connection to them. I understand they're canon, they're part of the universe, but using them as replacements for Cortana doesn't work. I don't know who they are, and their inclusion undercut not only the audience's relationship with the chief, but Cortana's as well. I'd even go so far as to argue, and I realize this will probably be a vastly unpopular opinion, that while canon is canon, there's an understood distinction between a piece of fiction's extended universe and the primary portion, for lack of a better word. I don't think I should be required to search out books and comics, works meant to be supplemental, to figure out what's going on in a universe's main production, in this case a video game. The didact falls victim to this as well. If you only played Halo 5, you might not know he exists at all. The didact dies, kind of, in Halo Escalation, a comic series. He's killed by his own weapon, which turns his mind into digital essence that's held for safekeeping by humanity. Halo 4's main villain, and who was assumed to be the Chief's next challenge, has simply disappeared from the series, at least for the time being. Infinite needs a self-contained story. It shouldn't rely on things that happened in shows, books, or short films. Players shouldn't have to scroll through Wikipedia pages and Reddit threads to understand where characters came from, where they went, or some larger context. Next up on this list is something I'm a little torn on. For all of Halo 5's faults, its transition to faster, more skill-based movement I actually enjoyed. Characters can grasp ledges, dash into cover, or hover after jumping to give themselves a few seconds to fire. It's fluid, keeps you thinking as you move, and makes the combat more reactive, and I liked it. I'm torn because I also really love and even kinda miss the slower trotting pace of older Halos. Both styles work, and they're both worth keeping. The question really is, in what capacity? If I got to pick, I'd make Infinite's movement more in line with older Halos, but I wouldn't get rid of Halo 5's elusiveness altogether. I don't think grasping ledges would disrupt the older movement style too much, but things like hovering and dashing would have to go. I think keeping all those abilities as options for custom games would be fine. 343 did give players the option to turn them off in custom games, so perhaps instead Infinite could have an option to turn them on. Another change I'd like to see is a reduction of bullet magnetism. Halo 5's aim assist never bothered me, but the degree to which bullets would curve to hit targets was perhaps higher than it's ever been in the series. This makes multiplayer feel cheap, it's too much hand-holding. The sniper rifle is a good example of this. Its power and effectiveness comes at the cost of being an incredibly precise weapon. I was never any good with it in older Halos, but in Halo 5 I was suddenly hitting shots I had no business hitting. Making the sniper rifle easier to use for everyone might be more player-friendly, but it dilutes how rewarding it is for players who are actually skilled with it. Keeping all weapons, let alone just power weapons, specialized and handle with differing degrees of difficulty makes multiplayer more dynamic. Similarly, Halo 5 marks its power weapon locations and shows their respawn timers as waypoints. It even warns players as they get close to respawning. Power weapons like rocket launchers, shotguns, and sniper rifles are obviously important. If you control power weapons, you control a match and give yourself a much higher chance at winning. Marking power weapons is, again, player-friendly, but reduces the reward players get from learning the maps and keeping mental notes of used and unused weapons. Halo has been heavily skill-based for much of its multiplayer history, and Halo 5 is too, but to a lesser amount. I'd prefer a Halo that veered back to its older self, that gave less to the player and required more of them. Before we leave multiplayer, one more thing. Many of Halo 5's 343 developed multiplayer maps were made in Forge, if not at least using the assets in Forge, resulting in bland, plasticky, flat environments. Even some classic Halo maps brought back from previous games like Headlong, known as Guillotine in Halo 5, were remade in Forge, and they look strikingly and disappointingly bad. This is too bad because Halo 5's native maps look great. It's not a bad looking game at all, and going from this to this, is jarring. Halo 5 has 25 maps that aren't connected to a specific game mode. Of those 25, 10 are Forge-made and 15 are actual 343 developed maps. And some of those are remakes of maps from previous games. The Forge-made maps are a misguided attempt to add content that makes many maps look underdeveloped and thrown together. I'd rather have fewer maps that are specially made, and that doubly goes for older classic maps. I'd love Lockout, Zanzibar, High Ground, Blood Gulch, and others totally remade on next-gen technology, as well as whatever 343 can conjure up and have them looking as good as they can. When it comes to giving the community tools to run wild, Halo 5 excelled. Forge is more fleshed out than ever, with tons of ways for players to build and experiment, and even if it released a year after Halo 5 launched, the custom game browser is awesome and facilitates a place for that community to engage and interact. I still remember hearing about Infection for the first time way back in the Halo 2 days, when things spread via word of mouth from Xbox Live Party to Xbox Live Party, and now Infection is an official game mode, but its origin was in grassroots community connectivity. Community has always been a massive element to Halo's appeal, at least for me, and Infinite needs to build on what Halo 5 did. I'd be beyond stoked to spend a Saturday playing mindless Halo minigames with a few friends and a bunch of randos from across the internet. A return of Firefight is a big wish from me as well, though not as it appeared in Halo 5. Firefight was first introduced in Halo ODST, a somewhat standard mode where you and your teammates fend off increasingly tough waves of enemies. Halo Reach added a litany of customization options for the mode, lending players all kinds of crazy co-op shenanigans. It was also playable offline, like a normal custom game. Halo 5 not only stripped Firefight of all its customization, but made it an online-only mode. Warzone Firefight, as Halo 5 calls it, is a firefight-like game mode where you and your teammates defend against increasingly difficult groups of enemies. It throws in different bosses and enemy types to mix things up, but the mode is far inferior to firefight modes of the past. Firefight's customization and reach made the mode larger in scope, and because of that, it was also more fun. This leads us to our final point of discussion, and before you say anything, yes, I understand this is a pipe dream. No microtransactions. Microtransactions had a negative impact on Halo 5. Warzone is the PvP version of Warzone Firefight. On paper, it sounds great, a pseudo MOBA where teams fight to capture bases and push the enemy back to their home base. When you capture a base, tough NPCs spawn to help defend your territory. It's a really cool mode, and the closest the series has ever gotten to a massive Battlefield-like battle on multiple fronts. And just like Battlefield, vehicles and infantry all make a difference. The maps are made in such a way that any player, even if they're on their own, can turn the tide of a match. But Warzone is also pay to win. Halo 5's microtransactions come in the form of rec packs, essentially glorified loot boxes, which give you an assortment of items, sometimes XP boosters and other times powerful weapons and vehicles. The more rec packs you purchase, the higher chance you have of receiving higher tier weapons and vehicles, which you can only use in Warzone. It's pretty blatant. Now, you can't use these items in a Warzone match until you've gained enough points, but even then, matches have a tendency to melt into a mess of people spawning with all kinds of crazy weapons and in all kinds of crazy vehicles. At their worst, rec packs absolutely ruin Warzone. The mode becomes oversaturated, far too many weapons and vehicles on the field, turning what can be an awesome mode into an unbalanced mess. I find it unlikely Infinite will include loot boxes, considering the Fallout games like Battlefront 2 left on the world, but I also find it unlikely Infinite will skip microtransactions altogether. Warzone is a mode well worth keeping, like Firefight, so if microtransactions have to be in Infinite, at the very least I hope they stay away from affecting gameplay. Halo's foundation, the slower, precise bullet spongy combat the series pioneered, isn't old. It doesn't feel outdated, overdone, or oversaturated. It needs execution and refinement, sure, but what made Halo good 10 years ago still makes it good today. From a business perspective, Infinite will mark an important point in Halo's history. It's a flagship IP that will not only assist in ushering in Xbox's next console generation, but has also been confirmed for PC too. Add to that Microsoft's announced Play Anywhere streaming service, and Infinite has an opportunity to reach a larger audience than any Halo previous. Going back to what made Halo so popular to begin with, the unique multiplayer, an endearing story everyone can experience, and giving the community tools to innovate and go crazy creating together is what I wish for the most.